I was 58 years old when I sold my home healthcare business for $45 million. It was the culmination of decades of hard work, but I kept it a secret from my 3 adult children. After my second divorce left me emotionally drained, I watched as they gravitated toward their manipulative stepfather, treating me like I was financially burdensome. They had no idea I was sitting on millions while they mocked my modest lifestyle. The truth would only emerge during their bankruptcy hearing. Before I share how my own children treated me like a beggar, while I sat on millions, drop a comment letting me know where you're watching from, and hit subscribe if you've ever had to teach someone a difficult lesson about respect. I grew up in a middle-class family in Portland. We weren't wealthy, but my parents taught me the value of hard work and financial responsibility. Those lessons stayed with me throughout my life, though my children would eventually forget them. At 22, I married my first husband, David. We were young and in love with big dreams for our future together. Within a few years, we welcomed our 3 beautiful children into the world. Jack came first, followed by Amanda 2 years later, and finally Tyler, our youngest, 3 years after that. While raising our young family, I started a small home healthcare business. It began as just me providing in-home care services for elderly clients who needed assistance but wanted to maintain their independence. David was supportive in those early years, helping with the children when I needed to work late and encouraging me when I doubted myself. The first few years were incredibly difficult. I would work during the day, providing care, then stay up late handling paperwork, accounting, and planning for expansion. There were countless nights when I wondered if I should just give up and find a regular job with steady pay. But something inside me knew this business could grow into something meaningful. After about 10 years, my persistence finally paid off. The business had grown to include 30 employees serving clients throughout the Portland area. We had contracts with several insurance companies and were known for providing exceptional care. I was finally drawing a comfortable salary and could see a bright future ahead. But as the business flourished, my marriage began to falter. David grew resentful of my success and the time I spent away from home. Though I tried to involve him in the business, he showed little interest. He preferred to complain about my long hours, rather than understand the responsibility I felt toward my employees and clients. By the time I was 37, after 15 years of marriage, David and I divorced. The split was difficult but relatively fair. He received our family home and moderate alimony, while I retained full ownership of my growing business. Our children were 15, 13, and 10 at the time. Initially, the children lived primarily with me, but they gradually began spending more time with their father. David had more free time to devote to them while I was still building my company. Though I made every effort to be present for important moments, there were times when work emergencies kept me away from school events or family gatherings. Despite my growing professional success, I often found myself alone in my apartment after long workdays. The emptiness contrasted sharply with the bustling offices where I spent my days. I told myself that my children would someday understand my sacrifices, that building this business was part of creating security for their futures. I had no idea how wrong I would be. 3 years after my divorce from David, I met Charles at a healthcare business conference in Seattle. He was charming, attentive, and seemed genuinely interested in both me and my business. After years of feeling unappreciated by David, Charles made me feel valued and understood. Our romance moved quickly. Within a year, we were married. I was 41 and my children were now teenagers, 18, 16, and 13. Initially, everyone seemed happy with this new arrangement. Charles presented himself as the perfect stepfather, taking an interest in the children and their activities. For the first time in years, I felt like my family was complete again. But gradually, Charles revealed his true nature. What I had mistaken for interest in my business was actually a calculated assessment of my financial status. The man who had seemed so supportive began subtly controlling aspects of my life, from questioning my business decisions to criticizing my parenting choices. Most disturbing was how he methodically turned my children against me. With the subtle skill of a master manipulator, he portrayed me as a workaholic who cared more about money and success than my own family. He would say things like, "Your mom has to work late again. I guess those clients are more important than your basketball game." Or, "She means well, but business people just think differently about priorities." My teenage children, already dealing with the complex emotions of adolescence and our earlier divorce, were vulnerable to his manipulation. They began to view my work not as necessary or admirable, but as a choice I made over them. As my home life grew more unhappy, I found myself working longer hours. The business thrived, even as my personal life crumbled. By this time, we had expanded to 3 offices across Oregon with over 100 employees. The company had become my refuge, the place where I felt competent and appreciated. Meanwhile, my children were growing into young adults with increasingly entitled attitudes. Jack started college to study finance. Amanda pursued design school, and Tyler was finishing high school with vague plans for his future. All 3 expected financial support for their education and lifestyles, yet showed little appreciation for where that money came from. Charles encouraged their materialistic tendencies, often suggesting expensive gifts I should buy them or exclusive opportunities I should provide. When I suggested more reasonable alternatives or tried to teach financial responsibility, I was portrayed as stingy or out of touch. After 8 painful years of marriage, I finally accepted that Charles had married me primarily for financial security. The final straw came when I discovered he had been pressuring my financial officer for information about my business valuation and personal accounts. The divorce was bitter and difficult. Charles demanded half of my business, claiming he had contributed to its growth through his support and advice. Thankfully, my lawyers had ensured our prenuptial agreement was solid and the business assets were protected. Charles received a reasonable settlement that reflected our years together without endangering the company I had built from nothing. What the divorce could not address was the relationship Charles maintained with my now adult children. At 26, 24, and 21, they were old enough to make their own choices about who they maintained relationships with. To my deep disappointment, they remained close to Charles, often seeking his advice on financial and career matters, instead of coming to me despite my far greater experience and success. 6 years after my divorce from Charles, when I was 52, I received an unexpected call from the CEO of a large healthcare conglomerate. They were consolidating services in the Pacific Northwest and wanted to acquire my company. After weeks of negotiations and due diligence, they offered $45 million. The figure was staggering. Even after taxes and setting aside funds for my loyal employees, I would have more money than I could spend in my lifetime. After 30 years of building my business, I decided it was time to sell and start a new chapter. For reasons I could not fully articulate even to myself, at the time I decided to keep the sale amount secret from everyone, including my children. Perhaps I wanted to see how they would treat me when they thought I had limited resources, or maybe I was tired of being valued only for my financial contributions. I moved from my executive home to a modest 3-bedroom house in a different neighborhood. When my children asked about the business and the move, I simply said I had retired comfortably, but gave no specifics. They assumed, as I suspected they would, that I had enough for a basic retirement, but nothing extravagant. Almost immediately, their attitudes toward me shifted. Jack, now an investment banker with a prestigious firm, began explaining basic financial concepts to me, as if I were financially illiterate, despite the fact that I had built and sold a multi-million-dollar business. "Mom, you really need to understand how inflation will affect your limited retirement funds," he would say condescendingly. Maybe I should take control of your investments before you make a mistake. Amanda, who had established herself as an interior designer for wealthy clients, made constant comments about my quaint and budget-friendly home decor. She would bring catalogs and point out items saying, "This would look so much better than what you have, but I know it is probably out of your price range." Tyler, my youngest, had started and failed several small businesses each time, blaming market conditions or bad partners rather than his own lack of planning. He only called or visited when he needed money for his next venture, explaining how it was a sure thing and how I would definitely get a return on my investment. Meanwhile, I noticed they maintained lavish lifestyles despite their modest professional success. Jack drove a luxury car that cost more than his annual salary. Amanda wore designer clothes and took expensive vacations. Tyler somehow maintained a downtown loft apartment despite having no steady income. Behind the scenes, I discovered that Charles was still acting as their financial advisor. He encouraged their spending habits and risky investments, perhaps out of spite toward me, or simply because he was as financially irresponsible as he had taught them to be. Family gatherings became increasingly painful. I would learn about vacation plans or holiday celebrations after they had occurred through social media posts or casual mentions. "Oh, we assumed you would not want to spend that much on a ticket to join us," they would say, or "We thought that restaurant would be too expensive for your budget." Despite their treatment, I still helped them financially in modest ways that seemed appropriate for someone of my supposed means. I would offer to help with a car repair for Jack, contribute to Amanda's health insurance when she was between clients, or pay Tyler's phone bill when he claimed to be short on cash. As months passed, I began to see evidence that Charles was deeply involved in manipulating my children's finances. They mentioned investment opportunities he had told them, about business connections he had made for them, even loans he had arranged. When I expressed concern, they dismissed me as jealous of Charles's financial acumen. Little did they know I was quietly managing my $45 million with the help of a team of financial advisors, watching my wealth grow, even as I lived simply and gave generously to causes I believed in. The irony of their condescension was not lost on me, but I remained silent, waiting to see if they would ever recognize my worth beyond my wallet. 3 years into my modest retirement, an economic downturn hit the region hard. Businesses closed, investments tanked, and the real estate market collapsed. My carefully managed portfolio weathered the storm well, thanks to my experienced financial team, but my children were not so fortunate. Jack was the first to feel the impact. The investment bank where he worked had been involved in some risky ventures that failed spectacularly. After a tense all-staff meeting, he and dozens of his colleagues were laid off with minimal severance. His expensive lifestyle had left him with little savings to fall back on. Amanda's interior design business catered to wealthy clients who suddenly became more cautious with their spending. Contracts were canceled, deposits were returned, and her income dropped by 70% in just 2 months. The showroom lease she had just signed became an albatross around her neck. Tyler's latest startup, a specialty food delivery service, failed as customers cut back on luxuries. The investors he had somehow convinced to back him pulled out, leaving him with business debts and no income. His girlfriend of 3 years left him tired of his financial instability. One by one, my children began to panic about their finances. But instead of coming to me, they turned to Charles for guidance. He had been filling their ears for years about his investment prowess, despite having no formal training or significant success of his own. Charles proposed what he called a recovery investment plan that promised to not only recoup their losses, but multiply their remaining assets. From the vague details they shared with me, it sounded suspiciously like a Ponzi scheme with unrealistic returns and pressure to act quickly before the opportunity disappeared. Mom Charles, Says this investment has a guaranteed 20% return in 6 months, Jack told me during a rare visit. He has several high net worth clients already committed. I tried to warn him. Jack, in all my years in business, I have never seen a guaranteed 20% return in such a short time without substantial risk. Please be careful. He laughed dismissively. No offense, Mom, but running a home health aid company is hardly the same as high-level investing. Charles moves in different circles than you did. Similar conversations with Amanda and Tyler yielded the same results. They were convinced Charles had the answer to their financial problems, while my cautions were dismissed as outdated thinking from someone who did not understand modern finance. I watched in horror as they mortgaged their homes, liquidated their retirement accounts, and borrowed money to invest in Charles's scheme. When I offered to help them with basic living expenses instead, they acted as if my assistance was insignificant compared to the windfall Charles had promised. The tension came to a head at a family dinner at Amanda's house, which she had insisted on hosting, despite her financial troubles. I brought a homemade dessert and a bottle of wine, modest contributions that matched my supposed means. Still shopping at discount stores, Mom? Amanda commented when she saw the wine label. I guess that is practical on your fixed income. Tyler laughed. Remember when we were kids and Mom would always say we could not afford things? Turns out some habits never change. To be fair, Jack added with feigned generosity, Mom did the best she could with what she had. Not everyone has a mind for creating wealth. The conversation devolved from there, with each of my children taking turns making subtle and not so subtle digs at my financial status, all while praising Charles's business acumen and generosity. They discussed the luxury cars he drove, the vacation properties he supposedly owned, and the exclusive restaurants where he dined, all implied to be results of his investment genius. The final blow came when Tyler, after several glasses of wine, said, Let's be honest, Mom is kind of a financial burden on all of us now. We all chip in to make sure she is okay because her retirement planning was so inadequate. I sat in stunned silence as they nodded in agreement, completely unaware that not only was I fully self-sufficient, but I could have purchased everything they owned many times over without denting my accounts. Tears filled my eyes, not from their mistaken assessment of my finances, but from the realization that they saw me only as a source of money or a burden, never as a mother who deserved their respect regardless of her bank balance. I quietly excused myself and left my departure barely acknowledged as they continued discussing Charles's latest investment advice. Driving home to my modest house, I made a decision to investigate exactly what Charles was up to. I hired a private investigator with experience in financial fraud. Within 2 weeks, he confirmed my suspicions. Charles had created an elaborate Ponzi scheme using money from new investors to pay returns to earlier ones while skimming substantial amounts for himself. The scheme was already showing signs of imminent collapse as he struggled to find new investors. Now, I faced an ethical dilemma. Should I warn my children and potentially save their investments, but enable their disrespect and poor judgment? Or should I let them face the consequences of their choices, losing their money, but perhaps gaining valuable wisdom? After many sleepless nights, I decided that sometimes the most loving thing a parent can do is allow adult children to experience the natural consequence of their actions. I would be there to help them rebuild afterward, but first, they needed to recognize the true foundation of their financial house was built on sand. 2 months later, Charles's investment scheme collapsed spectacularly. The Securities and Exchange Commission opened an investigation. Early investors realized they could not withdraw their funds, and Charles stopped answering his phone. My children lost everything they had invested, which represented most of their assets. Jack's luxury condo was foreclosed upon when he could not make payments. Amanda had to close her design studio and lay off her small staff. Tyler, who had the least to lose financially, but had borrowed heavily for his investment, faced aggressive collection attempts from creditors. Jack was the first to call me at 2 a.m, his voice cracking with emotion. "Mom, I have made a terrible mistake. The investment with Charles completely failed. They are saying it was a Ponzi scheme all along. I have lost everything, even my condo." "I am so sorry to hear that, Jack," I said, my heart breaking for him despite everything. "What can I do to help?" "I hate to ask, but I have nowhere to go. Could I stay with you for a little while until I figure things out?" I agreed, of course. A mother's love does not disappear because her children have been foolish or unkind. The next day, Amanda appeared at my door with 2 suitcases and tears streaming down her face. "The bank is taking my house," she sobbed. "All my furniture, my art, everything I worked for is gone. Charles promised it was a sure thing." Tyler's approach was different and came a week later. He showed up unannounced, angry rather than contrite. "I need $50,000 by next week, or these loan sharks Charles connected me with are going to make my life very unpleasant," he demanded. "You must have some savings or something you can liquidate." I offered them all what I appeared able to afford: shelter in my modest guest rooms, simple meals, and emotional support. Jack and Amanda accepted gratefully while Tyler took the room but continued to pressure me for large sums of money I supposedly did not have. Even in their desperate situation, living under my roof, their disrespect continued. One evening, I overheard them talking in the kitchen when they thought I was asleep. "We need to figure out how to get the old lady to give us more financial help," Tyler said. "She must have some retirement account or home equity we can tap into." "I have been looking around for her financial statements," Amanda admitted, "but she keeps everything locked in her desk drawer." "Maybe we should suggest she take out a reverse mortgage," Jack proposed. "She does not need this much house anyway, and we could use that money to start over." Their words stung, but they also confirmed what I needed to know. Their attitudes had not changed despite their circumstances. They still saw me as a resource to be used rather than a person to be respected. Meanwhile, the legal consequences of Charles's scheme were unfolding. He filed for bankruptcy protection in a transparent attempt to shield whatever assets he had left. My children, following their stepfather's example rather than the financial responsibility I had tried to teach them, each filed for bankruptcy as well. I consulted with my financial team and lawyers about the upcoming bankruptcy court hearings. As I learned about the proceedings, a plan began to form in my mind. Perhaps there was a way to finally break through to my children to teach them the lesson they so desperately needed to learn about respect, integrity, and the true value of family. The nights before the hearing, I lay awake, considering the path forward. I thought about the nature of parental love, the fine line between supporting and enabling, and how sometimes the most difficult lessons are the most necessary ones. I reminded myself that true love sometimes requires allowing people to face the consequences of their choices, while standing ready to help them grow from those experiences. With my decision made, I prepared myself emotionally for what would be a dramatic revelation, one that would either break our family bonds completely or forge them anew on a foundation of honesty and mutual respect. The bankruptcy court was housed in an imposing granite building in downtown Portland. I arrived early and took a seat in the back row of the courtroom, dressed in a simple but professional navy blue suit that belied my financial status. My children and Charles sat in the front with their respective lawyers, not even turning to acknowledge my presence. They looked defeated, their designer clothes now wrinkled and their expressions strained. Charles kept whispering to his attorney while occasionally glancing nervously around the room. As the judge entered and the proceedings began, the full extent of their financial irresponsibility was laid bare for all to hear. Jack had accumulated over $800,000 in debt between his mortgage, car loans, credit cards. and the failed investment. Amanda's design business had outstanding loans and unpaid vendor accounts totaling nearly $600,000. Tyler, despite having the least income of the three, somehow owed creditors over $400,000. Charles's situation was even more dire. As the orchestrator of the investment scheme, he had debts exceeding $3 million, with the SEC investigation threatening potential criminal charges as well. When asked to explain how they had arrived at such financial ruin, Charles spoke up confidently. "Your Honor, we were victims of the economic downturn. Our investments were sound, but were undermined by market forces beyond anyone's control. With a little time and the protection of the bankruptcy court, we can restructure and make good on our obligations." The judge, a no-nonsense woman in her 60s, looked skeptical. "Mr. Harrington, the SEC report suggests something quite different about the nature of your investment fund, but we will address that in separate proceedings." As she reviewed their financial declarations, the judge frowned. "I see very limited assets listed here, despite records showing significant income over the past several years. Can you account for where that money went?" My children and Charles looked at each other nervously, none willing to admit to their extravagant spending and poor financial decisions. It was at this moment that my lawyer, Mr. Peterson, rose from his seat beside me and approached the bench. "Your Honor, I represent Georgia Williams, and we would like to address the court on a matter directly relevant to these proceedings." All heads turned in surprise as I walked confidently to the front of the courtroom. Jack, Amanda, and Tyler looked confused while Charles's face drained of color as he seemed to sense what might be coming. "Your Honor," I began, my voice steady despite my racing heart. "I am the mother of Jack, Amanda, and Tyler Williams and the former wife of Charles Harrington. I have information that will significantly impact these bankruptcy proceedings." The judge nodded for me to continue. 6 years ago, I sold my home healthcare business for $45 million. I stated, clearly watching as gasps and murmurs filled the courtroom. After taxes and distributions to key employees, I retained approximately $35 million, which has since grown to nearly $40 million through careful investment. My children's faces registered shock, disbelief, and then dawning horror as they realized the implications of what I was saying. I deliberately kept this information from my family after observing their increasingly materialistic values and disrespectful attitudes. I wanted to see who would value me for myself rather than my financial resources. I turned to look directly at my children. Over the past 6 years, I have watched as my own children followed the financial advice of their stepfather, rather than coming to me, a successful businesswoman with a proven track record. I warned them about this investment scheme, but they dismissed my concerns. They have treated me as financially burdensome and intellectually inferior, all while I sat on a fortune that could have protected them from their current situation. Charles attempted to stand, but his lawyer pulled him back down. "Your Honor, I would like to formally declare myself as a major creditor in these bankruptcy proceedings. My financial team has documented how Charles Harrington specifically targeted my children because of their connection to me, likely hoping to eventually gain access to my assets." I then laid out my proposal. I am prepared to settle their debts under specific conditions that I believe will serve the interests of justice, while allowing my family an opportunity to rebuild both financially and emotionally. The judge leaned forward, intrigued. "And what are those conditions, Ms. Williams?" "First, that Charles Harrington receive no debt relief for any funds directly or indirectly obtained from my children. Second, that my children commit to comprehensive financial literacy training and regular therapy sessions to address the manipulation they have experienced. And third, that they sever all financial ties with their former stepfather as a condition of my assistance." I could feel the weight of my children's stares, a mix of anger, embarrassment, and perhaps a glimmer of understanding. Charles, meanwhile, had abandoned all pretense of composure and was frantically whispering to his lawyer. When Charles finally stood and approached me after the judge called a brief recess, his demeanor had changed completely. Gone was the arrogant financial advisor, replaced by a desperate man seeing his last chance at avoiding financial ruin. "Georgia," he said with a forced smile, "you should have told me about your windfall. We could have worked together on this. I still care about the kids, you know. Maybe we could discuss a joint approach to helping them." Looking him directly in the eyes, I replied loud enough for everyone nearby to hear, "Charles, you have manipulated and disrespected me and used my children as pawns for over a decade. You have nothing I need or want. Please direct any future communication through my attorney." His face hardened as he realized his last manipulation had failed, and he walked away, already calculating his next move in a game I would no longer play. As the courtroom emptied for the recess, my 3 children approached me, their expressions a complex mix of emotions I could not fully decipher. Our real conversation and the hard work of rebuilding our relationship was just beginning. The weeks following the court revelation were difficult. My children moved out of my guest rooms and into a small apartment they rented together, needing space to process their feelings about what had happened. Their initial reaction was anger, not remorse. "You tested us," Jack accused during a tense coffee meeting a week after the hearing. "What kind of mother does that to her children?" "I did not set out to test you," I responded calmly. "I simply stopped announcing my financial status and observed how you treated me when you thought I had little to offer materially. You showed me who you truly were, and it broke my heart." Amanda was more emotionally fragile. "I feel so humiliated, she said through tears. "Everyone knows our family business now. How could you expose us like that? Your financial decisions were already a matter of public record through the bankruptcy filing," I reminded her gently. "I exposed nothing except my own assets and the truth about our family dynamics." Tyler remained the most resistant. "You could have prevented all this if you had just told us about the money in the first place," he argued. "We suffered because of your little social experiment. You suffered because you followed the advice of a man who never had your best interests at heart, ignored the guidance of someone who built a successful business, and made choices based on materialism rather than sound financial principles." I replied, refusing to accept blame for their decisions. Despite their resistance, the conditions I had set for my financial help remained firm. They would need to attend financial literacy classes, participate in therapy, and cut ties with Charles if they wanted my assistance in rebuilding their lives. Jack was the first to come around. After a month of stubborn resistance, he called and asked to meet. Over dinner at a modest restaurant, he finally showed genuine humility. "I have been thinking about how I treated you," he said, his voice quiet. "Even before the bankruptcy, even before Charles. I started believing that my finance degree somehow made me smarter about money than you, who built a business from nothing. I was arrogant and disrespectful, and I am truly sorry." His apology was the first step in a long healing process. He enrolled in the financial classes, began therapy, and slowly started rebuilding his career with a smaller firm, living within his means for the first time in years. Amanda followed a similar path a few weeks later. After a particularly emotional therapy session, she called me in tears. "I keep remembering all the comments I made about your house, your clothes, your life," she sobbed. "How you must have felt sitting on millions while your daughter treated you like you were some poor relation. I am so ashamed." Her design business had been lost in the bankruptcy, but with my guidance, she started a new, smaller practice focused on affordable design solutions rather than luxury projects. The experience had shifted her values in ways that ultimately made her work more fulfilling and sustainable. Tyler took the longest to find his way to understanding. For months, he maintained that everyone else was at fault for his problems. It was only after Charles was indicted for fraud, and evidence emerged of how deliberately he had manipulated all three of my children, that Tyler finally began to recognize the truth. "I thought he cared about me," Tyler admitted during a long walk in the park near my home. "I thought he was the only one who believed in my potential, but he was just using me to get to you all along." With this recognition came the beginning of genuine change. Tyler, who had always launched businesses seeking quick wealth, started working for a nonprofit organization helping young entrepreneurs develop sustainable business models. The steady paycheck and meaningful work gave him a foundation he had never had before. As my children fulfilled their agreement to attend financial classes and therapy, I began selectively using my wealth to support their new paths, but in ways that promoted growth rather than dependency. For Jack, I offered to match his retirement contributions rather than buying him luxury items. For Amanda, I invested in her new business, but required detailed business plans and regular financial reviews. For Tyler, I paid for additional education in nonprofit management, but did not fund his living expenses. Our family therapy sessions revealed years of manipulation by Charles that went deeper than any of us had realized. He had systematically told different versions of events to each family member, creating divisions he could exploit. Learning how thoroughly we had been played helped us forgive each other and begin to rebuild trust. I established new boundaries as well. My financial support came with expectations of respect and responsibility. When old patterns of entitlement occasionally resurfaced, I calmly but firmly pointed them out and refused to engage until the behavior changed. Slowly, our interactions became more authentic and less transactional. My own journey of healing was perhaps the most surprising. I had to confront my guilt about being an ambitious working mother and my need for approval from my children. I recognized how I had enabled their entitled behavior for years by trying to buy their affection when I felt guilty about my work commitments. In therapy, I learned that my worth as a mother was never determined by either my working hours or my financial contributions. A year after the bankruptcy hearing, we gathered for Thanksgiving at my house, the first holiday we had spent together since the revelation. The atmosphere was different from any family gathering I could remember. There was an authenticity to our conversations, a genuine interest in each other's lives, beyond material concerns. As we sat around the table, I looked at my children, now 36, 33, and 30, and saw the adults they were becoming. Jack spoke about his satisfaction in helping moderate-income families plan for retirement. Amanda shared stories of clients who were creating beautiful homes on modest budgets. Tyler described a youth entrepreneurship program he was developing. "I have been thinking a lot about what wealth really means," I said as we finished our meal. "For decades, I believed I was building financial security for this family. But what good is money if it becomes the only language we speak to each other? What I wanted most, my true wealth, was always your love and respect, freely given not because of what I could provide, but because of who I am to you. The hardest lesson I have learned is that respect cannot be bought. It must be earned and it must be mutual. By the same token, love that is conditional on financial support is not really love at all." Jack reached over and squeezed my hand. "I think we have all learned that the hard way." "The money never mattered," Amanda added softly. "What matters is that we almost lost each other." Tyler, still the most reserved but making progress, simply nodded. "I am trying to be someone you can be proud of, Mom. Not because you are wealthy, but because you are strong, smart, and forgiving." As I looked around at my imperfect healing family, I felt a freedom I had not experienced in decades. The weight of secret wealth, the burden of unappreciated sacrifice, the pain of conditional love, all were gradually lifting. In their place was something far more valuable: relationships based on truth, respect, and genuine connection. The $45 million sitting in my accounts would provide security and opportunities for all of us. But the real treasure was sitting around my table, learning to value each other for who we were, not what we owned or could provide. That lesson, painful as it was to learn, was worth more than any amount of money. What about you? Have you ever discovered that someone valued you only for what you could give them, rather than who you are? Or have you found yourself measuring relationships by material standards? Share your thoughts in the comments below. And if this story resonated with you, please subscribe, and share it with someone who might need this reminder about what true wealth really means. Thank you for listening to my journey, and remember, your worth never has and never will depend on your bank account.